My name is Beatriz Valdez, and I'm the controller here at SCAC, and I will be the presenter today for this training. We're going to go over how to fill in the invoice template for your program. And we're currently presenting this thinking that this template itself will be able to be used for the RUSH program, for the NOFA program, for the HIT program, and for the SRP2 program. If you guys identify something different as you guys working through your invoice, please let us know and then we'll work out with you to try to see if we need to make a modification to the template itself. We won't go over introductions of all the people attending today's training in order to make sure that we could complete the training within the hour and a half that we schedule it. But if you guys can add your name, title, and agency into the chat, that will be great. In case you guys have questions, we're able to respond to those questions and get a better idea about who attended the class. Today, we're going to go over the MOU rate confirmation worksheet that most of you have already probably completed. Your scope of work approval form, which you probably are working with your PM right now. The invoice template itself, and then we're going to give you some examples on what we're expecting the invoice template and package to look like when it's been submitted by your entity. We have also going to provide you what the invoice order will be for your PDF file. And that's just more of a suggestion so that it's easier for everybody to review and to go back and forth to identify if you have the right supporting documentation. Other resources that we're going to be providing you will be a list of common disallowances, the fringe benefit worksheet calculation if you don't have an approved fringe rate. We're also going to go over the de minimis rate calculation worksheet, and then your modified total direct cost is explanation in case you're using the 15% modified allocation. So hopefully by the end of today's training, you'll have a better understanding on how to fill the invoice and then the requirements that the reasons of why we're imposing those requirements. We'll be sharing the presentation slides with you, Maya, and I know that I didn't have a chance to send it to you this time, but we'll be sharing them after the training. And once we also recording the training today, we'll be also sharing the training presentation with you in case you have other members of your agency that should be attending the training. So the scope of work, let me see, your MOU rate confirmation worksheet. This is something that you should have been already working at with our with the PM and our budget and grants team. This is asking you for information related to your fringe rates and your indirect cost rates. If you have an approved federally funded rate, which we call it a NICRA, which is a negotiated indirect cost rate approval, you will be submitting that to your PM, and then our budget and grants team will be reviewing and verifying that you have the right information, and then filling out this worksheet indicating what is the rate that we are approving to use as you're invoicing for cost. If you have those rates approved by the federal government, then you'll have a rating here identified, approved for a period of performance. You know, normally that period performance is your fiscal year. So if you're July through June, it will have that period of time in here. If you're January through December, you know, we'll be identifying that period of time. Anytime that you have a new rate approved, then we need you guys to submit a new form to us. Normally the rates get approved only for one fiscal year. So we do expect to be receiving this on an annual basis. If the period ended and we haven't received a new rate approval form from you, then next invoice that you send us, we will not allow you to claim any fringe or indirect until we have the new rate approved form submitted to us. Okay. In the event that you're still negotiating, with a federal agency, then we will need for you to let us know that you're working on that. And then you will not get reimbursement for those expenses until you get that approval, but then you can submit an invoice retroactively to reflect those changes so that you can get reimbursement for your fringe and overhead at that period of time. Okay. We do recommend that as your fiscal year is over and you get a new rate, that you submit your rate approval form as soon as you have it available. Don't wait until the next invoice because that will be delaying, the approval of your invoice. At that point of time, then we need to send this form to our budget and grants team. They need to review it, send it back, then we need to verify that the information is correct in your template. So it takes a little longer that if you actually submit it as soon as you have it available, then at that point of time, your PM, will work with budget and grants for that approval, and then we'll be updating your invoice template to provide you with a revised template with those rates embedded into that template. So we do recommend that you are proactive, with your submittal. Okay. The examples that we have in the package that you'll see is just how the forms, look like once they get signed, So you have one rate for a period of time. If the rate changed, then you have another rate approved. Most agencies, will have a one-to-one relationship, meaning that you might only have one fringe rate and one overhead rate. There might be instances when that is not the case, where some agencies will have multiple rates. Let me see if we have an example in here. This is also just 1 and 1. Oh, yeah. So we only have an example that only has one fringe and one indirect. But some agencies will have extra help employees working, or they might have different exempt versus professional that is not exempt. So you might have a different benefit package. So you may have different fringe rates. Or you may also break out your indirect based on the activities. Some agencies will have an indirect for transit services and versus, planning services. So if that's the case, in your program, you might have to submit your rate for all of them, get them all approved, and then you will need to identify to us what rate you're using depending on the program or the task that you're working on. If you guys have any questions, please add them to the chat or raise your hand. I'll ask, I have somebody looking for that information so that they can let me know that there's something that you have a question on. But please feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand, and then we'll try to address the questions as they come up. So that this document is what is taking place as you're working through your MOU approval. And this is just to help us as we reviewing the invoices to not having to ask for that information on a regular basis. This way you have a whole year before a new rate gets approved, and then we're only asking you, once a year. The next one is your scope of work approval form. The scope of work approval form is something that you are currently working on, or you just got that approved through your PM. But we incorporated in a scope of work approval into your MOU in order to try to simplify the MOU itself and speed up the approval of that MOU. This scope of work approval form includes not only your budget, like it's reflected in here in regards to the task and your project cost categories, but it also giving you deliverables that you have to complete. And so it's going into more detail of your scope of work. So your MOU might only have a single page or a few paragraphs of what the scope of work is supposed to be taking place. That's a high level scope of work. And then this form is referenced in your MOU. So it's a legal document that needs to be fulfilled. And we do give a little bit of authority to your project manager and their deputy director to make some changes in here instead of going back into having a full MOU amendment. So there's a couple things that can be done through your scope of work approval form. You know, it's going to be taking place at the beginning of your MOU. It's going to give you your deliverables. It's going to give you your budget by your program task and your cost categories. If your program requires an in-kind contribution, it will also identify the in-kind contribution that is required. It's going to give you beginning and ending days, at least estimated, for when those activities should be taking place so that the project manager is able to manage your program and your MOU to ensure that the tasks get completed timely and within budget. If there's a need to reallocate cost among the different cost categories or program tasks, then that reallocation can take place through the scope of work approval form. At that point of time, it needs to be happening, you know, before the costs get overrun in either category or task. You will need to contact your project manager at SCAC and then let them know that a reallocation of funds should be taking place and the reason for it. If the project manager agrees, then this form gets updated and then it gets approved by your agency. It has to be one of your legal representatives to sign the form, and then by our project manager and deputy director in our side. At that point of time, we'll have a revised form with a revised budget, and then our project manager will be updating your invoice template and providing you with a revised invoice template for you to continue invoicing us. Okay, so that can be taking place through the scope of work approval form. If for any reasons, you know, we are extending your MOU, you know, for a period of time of performance, or we need to make a change to the total MOU value, either up or down, then at that point of time, that requires an amendment to your MOU. Okay. That obviously takes a little longer, you know, because it has to go through approval of several entities, including, partners, including our legal and our CFO. So you have to make sure that, you know, we coordinate that change, you know, with enough time to give you enough time so that that change takes place before something happens. You know, we obviously cannot amend an MOU that expire for any reasons. So if we need to do an extension, we have to have enough time to do the extension before that expiration of your MOU. If the amount needs to be increased for whatever reasons, not that we can promise that it could be increased, but just giving you scenarios. If they need to be increased, then we obviously need to be taking place before that cost overrun takes place. Okay. So we need to be proactive with changes like that. Okay. So one of the reasons, you know, we were being asked is like, why do we need a PDF file of your invoice template and also the Excel file? Because changes can take place like your fringe rate or your indirect rate, or the changes to your budget between tasks can be taking place through the direction of your MOU. We always need that monthly invoice to be received not only in PDF, but also in the Excel, so that when it's time to make a change to your budget or to the period of performance or anything else in the invoice template, you know, those fields right now might be locked, or that PM will then open, you know, your file, your latest file with the latest information, update the rates appropriately, and then give you another file for you to fill out. Otherwise, we'll have to give you a blank template, you know, and then you have to start all over again, you know, from scratch on filling in where you add in regards to, you know, amount claimed to date and different things like that. So it is for your benefit that we asking you to just submit, you know, the both documents. Okay. This document, you know, while it gets approved by us, and it also gets, you know, and the other document for the MOU rate confirmation sheet is approved by us, we do ask you that when you submit your first invoice, you include that in the package, so that, we are not looking for that documentation throughout. There are different people's approving, like the scope of work is approved by the project manager, while the MOU work confirmation sheet, it gets approved by budget and grants, so it just makes it easier that if we have a package with everything in it, we identify that you verify that you use the right information. And then we have the whole invoice package complete for supporting documentation in case we haven't added. And we don't have to be going looking for, all those files in different locations. So anytime that you have a change, then we only ask for that information at the beginning, when you submit your first invoice, and then every time that you have a change. So at the end of your fiscal year, if you have a new MOU rate confirmation sheet, we expect in the next invoice that is utilizing that new rate to include that form, in your package. Same thing with your scope of work approval form. That can be changing at any given point of time. So we do need you guys to be submitting that revised approved one in the next invoice where that form gets becomes authorized to be used. As you can see in the form, it's going to have an approval date and it's going to have a revision number. So for the first one, there's obviously no revision. It's going to be blank. But as you have amendments that are taking place through the life of your MOU, then the revision number will be incremental. So then we'll know that, okay, there will be a date on when the revision takes place. So we obviously only going to apply that changes to that scope of work approval based on the revised date for that approval date, and then your amendment. So if you are an amendment 1, we'll be using amendment 1 for that period of time until amendment 2 gets approved. If there's only one amendment through the life of your MOU, that's the information that we're going to use, through the life of that MOU. Okay. So we did, in your package that we'll be sending, we did include a few samples. We have 3 samples today that we're going to go over. And that information is going to be provided, to you. And we'll go into details for that. Okay. So the invoice template itself, Jenkins, is there any questions so far on those 2 forms before I move into the template?
No questions.
No hands raised?
No.
Thank you. Okay. So your invoice template, we have 2 templates that we have right now that we're going to be presenting today. One is your cost reimbursement template that is utilizing an approved rate, from either the federal agency or an approved rate that is approved through us. In that case, if we approving a rate on your behalf for your French, for example, you will be filling another form, the French, worksheet, and we'll go over that. And then we have another example where we actually utilizing the 15% de minimis rate. Okay, so if you don't have an approved federally funded rate for your overhead, then you can use 15% de minimis. When you use a 15% de minimis, it applies against your total modified direct cost, and we'll go over definitions of that. But we have 2 different templates. So depending on what is your situation, then you will utilizing the right template. Okay. When the MOU gets approved and when your scope of approval form gets finalized, that information and your MOU rate confirmation sheet gets finalized, then that information will be shared to us in the accounting division. And then the accountant in our side will be filling out the right template on your behalf, So obviously we need to get information that give us an idea about what exactly you need, okay? Most agencies that have a federally approved rate, they're using that rate against their salaries and the basic salaries. So the rate gets applied to your salary rate component. But some agencies might not. Some agencies might use the total modified direct cost approach. And then in that case, we might have to then modify the template and then provide you a different template. So we didn't create as many templates because we don't know how many unique situations we have with the subrecipients, but we'll make sure that, once we send it to you, is hopefully the one that you really need, Please make sure that as you get the template, what we are going to fill in your side is that we're going to incorporate the budget information into your template, the name of your task, and then your cost categories, and obviously the rates, your fringe and overhead rate if you have one that is set and approved. Okay, so those things will be incorporated into your template. And then if you identified, obviously there's formulas in it and we'll go over those, but as you identified if it is correct or not, let us know if by mistake, we didn't understand how you're applying your overhead or how you're applying, your cost component, okay? So I just want to make that clear up front that we're going to try to help you out up front by getting that information about your confirmations to us, and then we'll be trying to utilize the right template on your behalf. So the examples that we'll have today, we have a few examples. A couple of them are with the regular template for cost reimbursement, where you actually have an overhead rate approved and a fringe rate approved, okay? And for those two examples, we have two different examples because some entities will have a system, an accounting system, where you're able to track your hours that you spend, that your employees have spent on the program. They're able to track it at that program level and task level. So it's easy for you to show that, that, for example, John Doe worked on a planning activity, for so many hours in this day for this pay period, So you have a report that provides that much detail, then we want a payroll report that gives us that information. So it makes it easy, for us to review and for you to provide support for your cost. But in some other instances, we have other entities that are unable to do that. And then you either have to do a payroll register that shows how much you pay John Doe, and then you have to provide us either timesheets or something else that shows how many hours they work for the particular task and program that you billing, So that's the difference between the two samples, So the template itself is the same. It's just the supporting documentation that you're providing to support that, yes, the costs that you're asking us to reimburse are valid and accurate. Okay, so that's the only difference. The third example that we're going to go over today is where you're actually using the % de minimis rate. When that takes place, obviously the template is completely different, and we'll go over that, but I just wanted to clarify why we have the three different examples. If today we finish those examples and you, for whatever reason, think that your agency is different, that none of the examples provided really match what you need to do, please, let us know, and we'll work with you in identifying what is unique about your agency. Okay. So in the presentation itself, we included some information, some pictures, like you're seeing in here, that gives you ideas about, how is the information related, how is the template related within each other, So we have 6 different tabs in the template, and the first tab is going to go over your instructions on how to fill it out. And then the next one is technically your cost summary component that you see in the left-hand side of the presentation. And anything that is in blue are formulas, So all this information is going to be linked or coming in from somewhere else within your invoice template file. Anything that is in gray is information that you will need to key, On the first, in your cost summary page, the information that you need to key is primarily just, reference information. The name of the MOU, the period of performance, the cost, the OWP number, which is, or work project number, the date for the invoice and the invoice number, so we can have a reference, the name of your project. So information that is general, your name, your contact information, the contact information for the agency. And we do expect this page to be printed out in your letterhead and then to be signed by your legal representative. The signature needs to either be wet signature or it can be PDF file signature, or you can do it through, DocuSign. But we do expect a signature that shows that a legal representative signed it, okay? From that perspective. We don't want to see, Jane Doe, being typed in Excel and then expecting to be utilizing that as your signature, okay? So in the presentation itself, we included some pictures. Then in here, you can see the reference that is indicating where this information is coming from. And then we put in some notes to just give you an idea, that like in this case, if you have local cost contributions, you can put it under other direct costs. Some of your programs, you might have your local costs spread out between labor, it might be a consultant cost that you matching, so you can have the breakdown, and if you need to support those costs at that level, you're more than welcome to use that in-kind match, and reflect that in the right cost categories. If you only have either a loan match requirement, where it's not paying for a particular cost where you're supporting, but you're actually just doing a cash contribution to the program, then make sure that you just put it in ODCs as an other direct cost. But if you SAF includes that you're going to be providing in-kind labor, we're expecting your cost to be showing in the labor category, because then you're going to provide us something that supports that, yes, you had a labor report, and then that John Doe, did X amount of hours, to provide the in-kind contribution, okay? So we'll go into more details when we actually show you the template itself, live template. But this is just giving you some ideas that we did put some pictures within the presentation and with a few notes for you, so that when you go back and then you're trying to fill, the invoice template, you can either go to our training as we're going through it, and that it walks you through the form itself, or you can go to the power presentation and kind of, follow the instructions that we providing here in the examples, okay? So we mentioned that there have 6 steps, and we'll go over those. Obviously, the line item billing is going to be your main detail for your cost, okay? Here, more examples of information that, that talk about contribution. And this is for the 15% de minimis template, which you can see is slightly different from your cost reimbursement template, where you're actually using a fringe benefit rate, okay? So I'm not going to go over the pictures because we're going to go into the live template, but hopefully the examples that we provided in here with notes for you will help you relate. We're going to try to do the same thing live. Like in this case, this is really showing, that if you have an hourly rate for your specific employees and you're providing us this type of report, here's what we're expecting to see and match the hourly rate, the period of performance, for that employee. And you can see that we redacted the majority of the information in here because we are using a labor report from one of our agencies, and we're trying to make sure that, we're not sharing anything that is PII. Okay. So let me go into one of the examples. So when you print it out, it's going to be in PDF, it's going to look like this. We're expecting to see, you can, if you don't, this one is giving you the instructions, it's the first step, and then it's giving you a little checkbox in here so that you have an idea of the steps that you're supposed to be taking, and then checking off when you believe you completed those tasks, okay? Then Here's the document for your cost summary, which is expected to be in your letterhead and then sign. This is your progress report. And we'll go live over them, but just giving you an example. This is your progress report. We obviously expecting you every month or every quarter, depending on how your MOU has been established. You know, you'll have a specific information about when your invoices are due. They're either due 21st days after the end of the month or after the end of your quarter, you know, depending on your MOU. So if it is monthly and is, you know, you're working in the month of December, we're expecting to receive an invoice on January 21st for that month of December expenditures, okay? It is a cost reimbursement MOU, so we do expect that costs have been incurred and you have paid for those costs before you invoice us, okay? So the progress report is going to give us an idea of the work that you perform for the period that you're invoicing.
Hi, B, could you zoom in on the progress report?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jenkins. So the progress report is going to be asking you for providing us information with the work that you perform for that period of performance that you're billing. So for this month, you can see this is in blue. So it's going to be filled out, you know, ready for the information that you key in that cost summary report tab. And then here's your name of the task. You know, task will be named depending on your SAF. We're going to start with task A and B for your program admin and your program management. And then we're going to have you actually project administration and then your specific tasks specifically related to your program. You know, most of the programs that we're discussing today are in planning activities. And I think we also included Rush Capital into this template. So if you're doing some planning activities, you know, the name of the task would be, you know, planning activity task. If you're doing construction capital, you might have a task that is for construction, you know. But the idea is that you will indicate in here what information, you know, you perform, and then the percentage of completion for that task, you know. So that information will give us an idea how close you are with completing the task, and the PM will have a better understanding, you know, if your cost that you are actually asking us to reimburse is relatively related to the percentage of completion, you know. So if you're asking for 100% for that task to be reimbursed, you should be at 100% of that project task to be completed, you know, relatively speaking. Okay, so that's kind of like the idea for the progress report. And then we have the specific cost category, you know, and we'll go into more detail because you won't be able to see this.
Hi, B, quick question.
Yes.
It's from Brio, and they're asking if can we invoice now for pre-development staff time, or do we wait until after MOU execution?
So we cannot reimburse any costs until the MOU has been signed. Okay, so if it hasn't been executed, we're unable to reimburse. So hopefully, you know, we need that SAF, you know, to also be signed off, you know, because otherwise we don't know what we're really reimbursing you for, you know, in what category it falls, you know. Several of our programs do identify a period of performance that is prior to MOU execution. So in the MOU itself, it will indicate that, but we need all that legal documentation to take place before we can actually make a payment. Otherwise, there's no contractual agreement in place where we can support an invoice to be paid, you know. So unfortunately, that's the case. So hopefully, I know our PMs, you know, in planning are working very diligently to try to get those MOUs executed. And so we're trying to do the trainings also ahead of time. So as soon as the MOU is in place and your SAA is in place, you know, we can immediately turn around and give you the invoice template with your right information in it, and then you can start doing the invoicing. So if you don't have a labor report that shows us, how much time you spend a specific task by day, then you'll need to have timesheets like in the example in here. The template Excel, we will be providing you a template that has this timesheet available so that you can key the first day of that day of the month, and then the information gets, the rest of the days gets populated, and then you just can key how many hours, you work on that program. Because it's a timesheet, we do need signatures to make sure that it's a valid timesheet. And then ODCs is the other tab that we have in your spreadsheet, which is going to indicate the detail that you reflected in your line item summary for your other direct cost. So that's kind of like, that's the template on how it looks like when you PDF it. So we'll go into a live example. Mm-hmm. And let me zoom. Is that good enough, Jenkins? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So here's the live example. So this is your Excel document. Like I mentioned, the first step is giving you some invoice submittal instructions. So we reflected in here A through F, and it's giving you an explanation on what A through F is just below. In this case, it's explaining that A is your cost reimbursement summary, and it's summarizing all the charges at task level. So once you take a look, if you go to the cost reimbursement summary, this is the document that we said, printed in letterhead. So we're giving you instructions right here. Please print this page in letterhead for your agency. It's asking you for the date that you are sending this invoice, your invoice number. So if you have a system where you create invoice numbers from your system, please utilize that. If not, you can do 1, 2, 3, whatever your invoice style number is, you can key it in here. This is just to give us a reference so that we know that we sequentially getting a monthly invoice, and then your 1, and then your 2 and 3 and 4, The billing period. So we do expect, if there is monthly, to be reflecting that you're doing invoicing from, December 1st to December 31st, 2024. If you are asking for reimbursement for those pre-development costs that happened prior to the MOU, obviously, then you're not going to start with December. You might be starting with, I don't know, May of 2024, or even earlier, depending on when the NOFA went out, for that particular grant program. Obviously, if you have a date in here, we're going to go back and then verify that the date is within the period that we identified in your MOU, So if your MOU indicates that, it has a specific date, let's say that it says, from May, 2024 through June, 30th of 2026, that you're not invoicing anything from April and prior to that, Some instances, it might indicate, when the NOFA availability became out, or the instructions for your grant application became out, when the date, when the award got approved, depending on what the situation happens to be, we're going to go back to that date and then verify that you're not asking for anything prior to that MOU approval effective date. Your MOU number, the project number, which is listed in your MOU. I think it's at the beginning of your MOU, it will say that, you know, this is project number or OWP number, 305 point whatever. We need that information, your MOU term date, your project time, title, and then agency name, the PM within your agency, your email, and then the SCAC PM so that we know who should be routed to. Everything in blue, like we mentioned, comes back from your invoice template. So they're all links, and you can see the links. We are obviously locking the links so that hopefully no mistakes, you know, no formulas get overridden. But in the event that you notice that we made a mistake and we linking it to something that it shouldn't, you know, please let us know. You know, we try really hard to make sure that the template is accurate, but doesn't mean that we couldn't make a mistake. Okay. So in here, this is the summary of all your costs. It's going to include your budget, which is coming again from your line item billing. And if you look into the cell itself, it's going to tell you where the information is coming from, so that can give you some idea. So the budget is coming from your line item billing. So it will be coming from here. And let me see if I should have an example with data on it. Why is it not data? Here's a better example. I'm sorry. This part is usually not done by me, so I'm just trying to figure out what the documents are. My partner in crime was unable to make it today. So this is a complete fill out form. So you can see the information coming in from your dates and the period of performance for your MOU term, the project name, and here's all the information coming in from your line item billing. Here's the budget. Here's the cost categories for your program task. And if you go to the line item billing, which is you see how this is coming from your line item billing, you'll go over here. Here's the names of your task, and then the task number. And that information, these two lines are combined in here to provide us with this information right here. Okay. Then the budget is coming in from here. Okay. But each of your project tasks. Okay. Your previously invoiced amount is also coming from your line item billing, and it's going to be inputting here. This information is gray, so you will be keying that information. So as you get paid, you know, on a monthly basis, you'll have to update how much you have been reimbursed for. And the reason of why we leave this as an amount that you have to key instead of being repopulated by the invoice from your previous invoice amount is because in occasions, you know, you will be submitting an invoice, and then for whatever reason, we may disallow an amount, and then therefore what you invoice might not be what you actually got paid. So we want to make sure that when you submit in the next invoice, you do update how much, you know, you actually got receiving payment. And that could be for many reasons of why this allowance took place. You know, for example, maybe there might be an instance where your rates, you know, are no longer valid because the period for that rate approval ended and you haven't got a new rate. So then we might disallow your fringe or your overhead until your new rate gets approved, you know. So if the information is not filled out correctly, then we might disallow something, and then therefore this data needs to be keyed by you on the next month, okay? Your year-to-date expenditure is a formula, you know, that is adding how much you got paid before versus your current invoice. And then your balance obviously is the difference between how much you have got expenditures today versus your budget. So that gives you a balance of how much you have available, you know, to spend in your future months. If you have in-kind contribution for your program, then we have a line item for your in-kind. And we put it separately because while these expenses are taking monthly place, and we verifying that all your costs are taking place on a monthly basis, for your in-kind contribution, where, if you have expenses every month related to in-kind, you're obviously going to reflect it. But if you have expenses, some instances where your in-kind might take place at the beginning of the program, in the middle of the program, or at the end of the program, depending on your program itself and the activities that you're performing, then you might only have a one-time payment, for example, so we're not going to be verifying that your progress of your task, completion, that if you're 50%, you're also 50% of your match. We're not verifying that, so you can incur your match whenever you need to incur your match and not necessarily on a monthly basis. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, please, ask a question on that. So we just separated in here, but it's still coming in from your line item billing. We made the last task your in-kind contribution, So if you have 6 tasks, your last one will be in-kind contribution. If you have 5, your last one will be in-kind contribution, and so forth, This is just makes it easier for the PMs and hopefully for you and for the accountants to know that your match will always be the last task, And then that in-kind contribution is not a portion that gets added to the cost component, but is reflected in here so that we have an idea that we're able to match, your SAF to that in-kind contribution. So if you put in-kind contribution in regards to labor and so forth, that is fine. So that takes place. So that component, you can see it is not part of your percentage of completion. So we don't have a percentage of completion in here. So the average of total completed for your program is not reflecting anything to do with your in-kind match. We do expect the in-kind match to be fulfilled by the end of the program of your MOU. So if you're submitting your last invoice and your required in-kind match is not up to the amount required, we are going to be unable to pay the last invoice. And hopefully that's not the case. So we never have to have a conversation about, what do we do at that point of time? Hopefully if there's any reasons of something is happening, then you should be discussing those reasons with your PM way ahead of time and not at the last invoice. So that information is coming from there, and then obviously put in your name and agency name, address. We don't necessarily use this to actually send you a check, but we do want to make sure that the information that we have where you're expecting a check that is in our system is the accurate information. So if for any reasons, you need, hopefully you're not using a check, that you're not wanting a mail check, that you're actually using ACH, the MOU does talk about filling out your ACH at the beginning of your MOU. So hopefully you do fill that out, so that we actually paying you electronically instead of mailing you a check. But if for whatever reasons you have to have a check, we do want to make sure that when you send us this information, we verify that your address that you're keying here is the address that we have in our vendor tables. And if it is not, we're not going to just mail you the check to the new address. We're going to ask you to fill out the vendor form information again, so that we can update our system with the right information. And then the signature that we discussed for your authorized official, most likely will be your CFO, or your executive director in that case. And that takes place of the first, tab in here.
B, we
So
have a
then when
question.
you, yes.
We have a question.
James?
Yeah, we have a question from Laura. If we have an exportable report from our timekeeping system that includes all the information required, could submitting that substitute using the timesheet template?
Yes. So one of the examples that we're going to be showing you would be a report that agencies, have submitted that provides us the name. as long as the report includes, and for most of you probably had already submitted, one of the things that we did, we did not verify rates, for your employees, because we do know that you might have a program, that Joan Doe works today, and then tomorrow is going to be Jane Smith, So if you have different planners, working in your program, and, you have promotions, you have turnover, we do identify that, that staffing changes, on a regular basis. So instead of approving an individual's, hourly rate, we did ask you to submit us a report that contained the information, So as long as you report that you exporting from your system contains the name of the employee, their title, their hourly rate, and the hours worked towards the program, that's all we need, so that gives us the calculation of how much you pay that employee, and obviously that hourly rate and that total salaries for that employee will be then reflected into the invoice template, and that matches, the report, then we're good. Then you don't have to do timesheets. The only reason of why we provided the timesheets is in the event that you are unable to do that, okay? And we'll give you a couple examples that shows you, the backup support. So hopefully all of you already went through providing us with that information and us verifying that you do have a report that supports that. If not, when we get the first invoice and you provide us with a report and it's missing one of those categories, then we're going to go back to you and ask you, no, this is not sufficient, So task number, I think in your program, like we show it in here, we only show project admin and then project management as having labor. And you might have labor in your in-kind, So if you have labor in your in-kind, so obviously that report needs to show the breakdown between, task A, B, in this case, task 6 for your in-kind, If you have, just, you engineer manager, like in here that we use Margaret Jones as the example. If you have Margaret Jones showing at $71.50, but only showing a total of, 200 hours for the month, which is too much, 160, let's say that they work a full time into this program, but it doesn't tell me how much they spend in each of these activities, then I'll need something that tells me that, because then I couldn't verify that $8,000 belongs to project management, and then the difference belongs to your in-kind, okay?
So B, a question from Suzanne. Could you elaborate on who's allowed to sign? The example displayed in this example shows a director in REAP 1.0. We had a program manager or a senior analyst sign off on the invoice. Will this still be okay for REAP 2.0?
No, I think we came up with an agreement internally that we should have, your CFO, your finance officer, somebody at the directorship level or above, signing, the actual invoice. So CFO, chief operating officer, chief executive officer, director of accounting, somebody at the directorship level, director of planning, if it is, your planning department, somebody in that capacity. Okay. So the next step that we're going is over the progress report. We will slightly talk about it already. So again, blue, once you fill the information about the name of your MOU in here, then the rest of your tabs will include that information in here, so you don't have to rekey it. Your project name will be reflected in here, and then you see the project task coming in, directly from the line item billing. This is the gray area where you're going to be putting the information about what task got completed during that month that you're invoicing, or for that period that you're invoicing. If you had pre-development expenses, you're going to be talking about your pre-development work, what work took place, and then the percentage of completion for that task. You do not have to use this tab in here You can use Word documents. If you're already tracking your project completion or work that you do, in Word or another contract management tool, and you want just to incorporate that, please you're more than welcome to include that, as long as you put the percentage of completion for each of the tasks in here. And the reason for that is that this information that gets comes into this tab, it's linked into your line item billing. So if you don't key it in here, then this percentage of completion is going to be blank, and then we're going to be returning it back to you because we need that information into the template to give us an idea about how much you spend versus how much we're paying you.
So another question from Suzanne. They're asking if we can request additional time in the MOU to accommodate this additional time required. Because often consultant invoices are received 2 weeks after the month ends. That leaves the agency with 1 week to complete the invoice and route it for review and signature. This is an unrealistic turnaround time.
That's something that, we'll have to discuss internally, so we'll write it up and discuss it with our planning and finance director before we respond to that. Okay. So then the line item billing is the next step. So the invoice template in here, telling you what the progress report was, and then line item for C for the invoice, for the line item billing, it talks about what it is, and then it gives you a note right here about, the intent for your local in-kind match, so it's going to give you a little bit explanation, that we need costs to be incurred, that you need to have references, to your supporting documentation for each of your line item billing. And then it talks about your in-kind contribution, so just giving you a high level overview about what you need to do in the line item billing. So in your line item billing, this information again is coming in. You are actually keying in, or we, in accounting, will be keying in the task number and your project number based on your SAF. And then from there, you're going to be keying in the name of the employees that work on your project, your hourly rates that you're paying, and then how many hours you spent, by task. If you have a budget that only shows all your labor and project task and project admin, so then you're only going to have labor in these two categories, and maybe have, labor and your in-kind match, Then the rest of your program activities may be done by a consultant, and you might have some other direct costs, and then those will be reflected in the categories below. So in the example here that we have the overhead rate being approved, and those overhead rates happen to be, we can open that overhead MOU worksheet. And that's sample one. Well, let me start with labor. So in this case, we have, Margaret Jones, and it talks about, page 1 and reference 1 and reference 4 for Margaret Jones at $71.15, and then she worked 112 hours into project management. So if we take a look at that example in here, you can see page 4 reference, Margaret Jones, for this period of performance, this in the example we use February of 2019, and then she making $71.15. This is a payroll register because the agency did not have a payroll report that shows us how many hours they work on the program. So in this situation, then we do need a timesheet that shows us that employee worked 112 hours into this particular example. Okay. And then if we keep going down, then we'll see the next employee, you know. So then we'll have the timesheets for that employee.
B, one of
Yes.
the questions is asking if you can list which worksheets are required and which ones we can substitute if we have all the required info.
So the only, you know, from the invoice template perspective, the only one that you can replace is your progress report. You know, that you can utilize a Word document instead. All the other tabs, you know, and the timesheet, if you have a payroll report, you know, which are the only two instances where you don't have to fill in the invoice template, you know. Everything else is required, you know, because there are links in between the tabs. So then if you have timesheets, then the timesheets will, so timesheets below. You can see the minimums. Shoot. Then the timesheets will look like this. And I think we showed you an example earlier. So you'll have the payroll report that I just showed you, and then you'll have the timesheet itself. Okay. And let me go back to the example. I'll show you. Then the indirect cost rate, then you will have in the first invoice, you'll have that invoice confirmation worksheet. And I'll open that one. And then you'll see how we're using 22% for French, which is what we have in here, 22.34%. And then we have indirect at 96.78. And then here's your indirect cost being approved at 96.78. Okay. So that information will match your rate, your confirmation sheet. And then you'll have an SAF approved. That will give you the name of your program, your subrecipient name, your original scope, the date that was approved, and then the amount of your budget by task. And then that information then will move below so you can see it. Right there. Matching your budget, 32,500, 32,500 for staff costs, $50,000 for task B. No budget for the rest of the tasks related to staff. Consultant cost, you can see 35,500. And then you can see 100,000 for the other task right there, you know. Then you have your in-kind contribution would be your last task. And in there, we only putting in, for us to match what your budget is, we only put in the total amount. We're not putting a total by a specific cost category. So in the event that you indicate that you're gonna be spending, in this case, it was all the in-kind was related to engagement and probably consultant component, then we, from that perspective, we only match into the total amount and we're not matching cost category by cost category for your in-kind. You need to provide support documentation if you're spending in labor. Obviously, your labor report will be reflecting how much you did for in-kind, but we're not matching. So in the event that you have indicated that you're going to spend $25,000 in labor and $75,000 in consultant, and you do the opposite, you don't necessarily need in a scope of approval form for making a change to how you're providing that in-kind from that perspective. Okay. So that information gets matched, so we do require that to be provided. And then for you consultant cost, if you have consultant cost, we are expecting to see an invoice from your consultant that matches the amount claimed. Okay. So in here, we have $25 for ODC for travel, and then we reflected $120,000 for your consultant. So we are expecting supporting documentation to match that. And the support documentation for that. The presentation.
Hi, B.
Uh-huh.
We have some questions. So the first one is the invoice template is to bill for the cost at the task level. For multiple projects, do we need to submit one invoice per project?
Yes, so if your agency has multiple, if you have a single MOU, but you have 2 or 3, as many projects listed, and you have a scope of work approval form for each project, you'll have an invoice template for each one of them.
And there's another question. They're asking, are there any SCAG specific requirements for consultants?
So if you hiring your consultant, and not going through a technical assistant on our side, that is CAC is hiring directly. If you have a consultant on your side, then you either had in the MOU indication about how that how you have to procure for it. And in some instances, then the PM is supposed to be reviewing, your procurement component or at least approving that sub-consultant component. So your MOU will give you directions about procurement. A lot of the agencies are not allowed to procure. But many, some programs do allow, your agency to procure. And if that's the case, then We don't have a specific requirements as long as fulfilling, the public contract code requirements and any other governmental procurement requirements. So if you are, doing construction, for example, then you have to do a bid. If you're doing a consultant agreement that is specific dollar amount that requires a full request for proposal, then that you do a request for proposal, and then you have all the guidelines and processes in place to select that vendor. So that is the requirement for that. It's not that we are going to be giving you guidelines on who or what or how to procure, your consultant or your construction, vendor. Any other questions?
No.
So if you have other direct costs, then we are expecting to have a receipt that shows, what are the costs related to that travel expenses. And if you have a consultant, like in this case, we are expecting to have an invoice that matches that. Here's the receipt example for your ODC for travel. In this case, it happened to be an Uber for $25, and that's what we reflected in the invoice template. If you are utilizing, if your budget allows you to do travel expenses and claim for travel expenses, you do have to utilize the State of California travel expenditure policy. If for whatever reasons your agency are reimbursing at a different rate, if it is higher, we will limit you at the rates that the state approves. If it is lower, we pay on actual costs. We obviously going to pay you at a lower rate. So little things to keep in consideration, tips, only 20% for tips. Then lodging and meal reimbursements would be at the State of California rates, which might be lower, especially in the lodging component. They have a limit, for that. So if you're spending more than that, then we don't reimburse, more than what the State of California will allow us to reimburse, since this is a state-funded program. Okay. So that was the $25 for ODCs. Here's the invoice example that we have for census. That was $120,800. You can see the period of performance matching. Again, this is for the month of February. This is for task number 3. So now we know that that is related to task number 3, and that's where the amount was reflected for $120,000. That's the match. The number 8 in here matches with, here's task number 3 for $120,800 for consultant, and here's your reference number 8. Just want to point out that your reference number system can be anything you want. It can be A, B, C, D. It can be 1, 2, 3, 4. So as long as it makes sense, and as long as you actually number your supporting documentation the same way. Okay. So just be consistent. If it was page 1 and page 4, in this case, it's not even page because it can be a lot of pages, but it's just saying category, number 4, from that perspective. So as you can see, that was the total cost, reflected with supporting documentation. If you have match, then we do expecting to support that match too. Okay. So if it is labor reports and timesheets. If it is French, obviously the French and overhead is going to be the same rates that had already been approved. So you already have your worksheet and your scope of work approval form. And if it is consultant labor, consultant expenses, we want obviously another invoice that shows that, yes, you did pay that consultant a specific dollar amount. Okay. That takes care of the line item billing. So the next one is your timesheet example that we have in here. You don't have to fill it out if you have a labor report that gives us that expenses. That breakdown. But in this case, they had only a payroll register. So we do need a timesheet You can see how it was referenced as number 1 for the month of February in here. This is obviously not signed, but we have the example with the signature in place, you know. And then we key in this particular example, we key to 119, and then the rest of the dates got populated by the formula. And then the name of the program, and then the actually hours work for that particular employee, okay? So in this case, it was supposed to be Margaret Jones right there, okay? If you have a payroll report that gives you that, you leave this blank, okay? And we providing you in this case, we're only gonna provide you one timesheet template, and then you can copy and paste it to create as many as you need, depending on how many employees are working in your program. So 1 month can be 2 employees, another month would be 1, and so forth, If you had ODCs, then we do expect the detail to be summarized, provided in here, so that we can tie back each of your costs, This case, it was an Uber, for a specific meeting, it was transportation on that date for $25, and that's all there was, so that's all you have to key in here. If you had printing costs, or if you had hotel costs, and, if you add in more, so in your line item billing, you might have travel at, instead of 25, let's say that you have travel of $1,000, your ODC summary is for you to break out how that $1,000 was made of, So if you went to a conference and you had hotel, and then you have mileage, and then you have, all these things that make the $1,000, we do expect a breakdown in here, because you're gonna have supporting documentation for each one of those transactions versus a single invoice or receipt. Okay, so that's how you fill the invoice template. Any additional questions on that? Because we'll go now about submitting that documentation.
Yes. So can fringe and overhead be rolled into the hourly rate, or does it need to be separated?
It has to be separated, because usually your fringe and overhead that is in your hourly rate is your actuals, which might not be your federally approved rate.
And another question is, if we provide timesheets showing the number of hours worked on any specific project, do you need the SCAG timesheet to be completed as well?
No, if you have timesheets in paper, that your employees are currently filling out by program, you can definitely submit that. You don't have to use our template, as long as it provides that same information.
Yeah, that's it for questions.
Okay. We, the templates that we're providing is to, obviously the invoice template in here, the line item billing, we want to use this because it already has all these formulas, it has a percentage of completions and things like that. But for labor component, we're providing you things to make it easier for you. But if you already have the same information, we're not forcing you to use our template. We just want to make sure that we provide you something in the event that you're unable to provide us with what you already have. So for your invoice submittal, we do expect you to submit, like we said, on the 21st of the month. And I know that somebody asked for extensions on that. We'll discuss that internally. We do need an invoice at least monthly, so we'll discuss that component, but and then send a response to all the people that attended if we make a change to that date. The MOU already states 21 days, it's already embedded into the MOU. The invoice package component is that we do expect the PDF and the Excel worksheet to be submitted to us on a monthly basis, to accounts payable at scag.ca.gov, and to be CCing your PM, So we have a centralized email location so that we can log that invoice, but then the PM is going to be responsible for reviewing the invoice, and we don't want to delay that review while we are putting the package together, and then logging the invoice and so forth. Like we mentioned, we do need both because might have to change something in your invoice template, and we want to have your latest and greatest from your agency, so that we can update that one instead of a blank template. We're expecting your invoice PDF template to be printed out the same order that we had in the tabs, so it's easy for us to follow. And then after that, we are expecting, and we have a listing here. We are expecting to see your SAF, your MOU worksheet, and then any supporting documentation that you're referencing behind it. So a single package for everything. We don't want the invoice template in PDF, and then, the SAF PDF file, and then the worksheet PDF file, and then, timesheets, and then, and so forth. We want one single PDF file. If you get into issues with loading because it's too big, please let us know, emailing it if your PDF is too big. But a single PDF makes it a lot easier to review than trying for us to combine, 10 different, attachments into a single document. Okay. Again, signature, either wet signature, PDF signature, anything that seems to be electronic or wet signature versus just writing somebody's name into Excel. In the line item billing, you saw how we reference. We use 1, 2, 3, 4 in a reference as example. You need to reference that. As long as a reference, it can be ABC, it can be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. For example, if you have multiple employees and you have multiple payroll reports or timesheets, you can have, sub numbers. It's up to you. Okay. Then for your invoice approval fringe rates, we want that at the beginning, the first invoice, and then any invoices afterwards where you have a change to either form. Okay. Same thing with your scope of work approval. Again, this is a cost reimbursement MOU, so we only pay for incur and pay costs claim. If you have local in-kind match, we do want to make sure that local in-kind match gets completely fulfilled before the last invoice takes place. Okay. Let me see what else. So here's the order that we're asking you to do your PDF invoice. We'll appreciate it if you actually follow that. Makes it easier for everybody to review the invoice in the same order. Some guidelines for these allowances. And I know that we're running out of time, so I know that it didn't show the 15% invoice template, but it's the same. It's just that it's calculating the modified total direct cost. But some guidelines for these allowances, just giving you an idea of items that we have disallowed in the past, not necessarily for your program, but by other programs, but are common issues, where we have an invoice, for example, for the month of February, but you're claiming for expenses that took place in March or took place before the period of performance or your MOU got signed, in the event that you don't have pre-development costs that you can claim, So if the period of performance does not match either for your consultants or for your direct labor, then we're going to disallow that component. If the hourly rate that you're claiming is different from the hourly rate that you paid, we're going to disallow that piece. If there's a disallowances in labor and your fringe and your overhead are directly related, a multiplication of your labor, then there's going to be disallowances of costs for fringe and for labor. If you travel to conferences, travel time is not allowed. If you're not using the per diem rates approved by the state, we'll be disallowing the differences between the two. If you're trying to claim for vacation, any paid time off, vacation, holidays, workers' comp, medical leave, any paid time off is disallowed. That's already built into your fringe cost, okay? For your overhead and fringe, if you don't have one that is approved, we obviously gonna disallow that component. For consultants, you may include a duplicate invoice by mistake, that you invoiced it in October and then, December you put it in again, you didn't realize that you had already invoiced it. So duplicate invoices obviously disallow if the amount that you invoicing is different from what you pay the consultant. In some instances, you might be paying the consultant more than what you're invoicing because you either have local match, or because you have excess costs that are not allowed by your overall budget for that task. If that's the case, if your invoice for your consultant is 100K and you're only invoicing 80K because you are paying for other activities, please make a note. Hey, we only asking for 80K because the other 20,000 are either unallowable for this task or the consultant was also working on a different task for a different project.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry to jump in. This is Jennifer from SCAG AV. I just need some guidance. There are people in policy A waiting for the 10:30 session. We are now 4 minutes over for this session. So what should I?
You can let them know that, this is related to the same program. Let them know that we're running, another 5 minutes late.
So should they just sit
And they can
and
just scroll
wait?
down for us.
Okay. And then just so we know, it's a separate Zoom link. So I'm going to need to end this session and set up the new session in the room whenever you guys give me the directive.
That would be great. Thank you for your help on that. Okay, so then we do have in here a fringe benefit worksheet. We're not gonna go over it, but if you were an agency that did not have a federally approved rate and you wanted us to approve your fringe worksheet, we did provide you one template that needs to be filled out and then and reviewed and approved by your external CPA. So there's guidance in how to fill that out. We also providing you the de minimis rate and modified total direct cost. So this modified total direct cost obviously is something that definition comes in from the federal government. And that is utilized on how to calculate what is your modified direct cost. Gives you definitions on what it is. It gives you explanations of some of the costs that you can include. So the template that is using the 15% invoice template is going to have a formula to multiply that 15% against total modified cost. So this example gives you in here what is considered a total modified cost, which be personnel, fringe, travel that is directly to the program. Equipment is not allowed, so you can see how it's excluded from that calculation. For your construction costs, they're not allowed. If you have a consultant, only a portion of that consultant is allowed. Components, So in this case, is the whole consultant is allowed, but if you're actually doing a sub-recipient on your site, which I don't think we have any programs like that, only the first $50,000 of that consultant, of that sub-recipient is allowed. So it gives you that component on how it gets calculated, and then the 15% gets multiplied at that rate and not the other cost, okay? So this gives you an idea on what that calculation happens to be, okay? Then your 15% verification form, if you're getting that 15% approved by the federal government for some reason, because you might also be using that 50% de minimis, then you'll need to submit documentation to Caltrans for that. For a RIP program, it doesn't have to be approved by Caltrans. It can be, you can fill this 50% certification form that says that you certify that you have a mechanism to track your direct costs, because we can only apply the 15% to direct costs and not to overhead. So it gives you some information about what you're certifying, and then you fill it out and sign it, and it comes to us. Budget and grants will review it, and it gets approved. And then you can utilize the 50% de minimis rate and the 15% invoice template in your submittal. So that pretty much concludes our training. We appreciate, you guys attending today's training. If you guys have any further questions, please feel free to contact me or go through your PM, and then they can write questions to us. Jenkins, is there anything else in there?
Yeah, is there any recordings available for reference for this presentation?
Yes, so we'll be once we finish, we did record the presentation. So once it becomes available, we'll be sending out the power presentation, all the examples that we went over, and then we will also send, the video for reference.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and sorry for the the issues that we had at the beginning. Appreciate everybody's work towards our programs, and we're looking forward to working with you in the next couple years.
Thank you.